It started with an insult, a single line from a man known for building dreams on four wheels. In 1963, Enzo Ferrari, the godfather of Italian sports cars, mocked a tractor maker with these fateful words: "You stick to tractors, I'll stick to cars." Those weren't just words, they were daggers, arrogance wrapped in silk, thrown from the high towers of Italian prestige. Enzo Ferrari wasn't just any man, he was a living legend. His cars were artwork, his name a symbol of speed, class, and dominance. To most men, a comment like that from Ferrari would have been the end of the road, an invisible wall between the elite and the ordinary, a reminder to stay in your lane. But Ferruccio Lamborghini wasn't most men. Born into the dusty farmlands of Italy, Ferruccio had spent his youth not in racetracks or factories, but in grease-stained overalls, fixing engines and machines with bare hands and stubborn grit. He wasn't raised with silver spoons or elite engineers, he was raised with calluses and ambition. So when Ferrari sneered at him, he didn't walk away in shame. He walked away in silence and started sketching plans. Because deep down, Ferruccio knew something that would soon shake the world of luxury cars. He understood machines. He understood engines. He understood power. And above all, he understood people. While Ferrari made cars for the elite, Ferruccio dreamed of making cars for the drivers, machines that roared with strength, but moved with precision. And most of all, he wanted to beat Ferrari at his own game. That single insult didn't end Ferruccio's story. It began it. What followed wasn't just a rivalry, it was a revolution. One fueled by pride, passion, and a relentless hunger to prove that greatness isn't reserved for those born into it. Sometimes it's forged in fire, ignited by the sting of doubt, and driven by the will to rise above it. This is the untold story of how a poor Italian farm boy turned a public insult into a symbol of prestige, power, and perfection. The story of how Lamborghini was born, not just as a car company, but as a declaration, a statement, a roar loud enough to challenge the prancing horse and change the world of supercars forever. April 28, 1916. Renazzo, Italy. A boy is born into the heart of Italy's agricultural belt, a land of dust, sweat, and vines. His name? Ferruccio Lamborghini. In a tiny stone farmhouse surrounded by rows of grapevines, the world welcomed a child who would someday rewrite the rules of Italian engineering. But in that moment, no one could have imagined what lay ahead. The world was in turmoil. World War I had cast a dark shadow over Europe. Food was scarce, money scarcer. For families like the Lamborghinis, life was about survival, not dreams. The vineyard was all they had. His father, Antonio, expected Ferruccio to follow in his footsteps, to tend the land, to work the soil, to live and die among the vines. But young Ferruccio had a fire that wouldn't be silenced. Where others saw dirt and grapes, he saw gears and steel. As a child, he would sneak away from chores, drawn not to the fields, but to the battered, grease-streaked tractor that groaned its way through the harvest season. That machine was his playground, his puzzle. He pulled it apart like a magician disassembling a trick, fascinated by every bolt, belt, and bearing. He'd get scolded for breaking it, only to repair it faster than the village mechanic. His hands were small, but precise. His mind, mechanical. While the rest of his family watched the sky for signs of rain or sun, Ferruccio watched the tractor's engine, listening to its rhythm like music. As he grew older, his passion didn't fade. It intensified. After grade school, he made a bold decision. While others stayed to tend the vineyards, Ferruccio left. He enrolled at the Fratelli Taddea Technical Institute in Bologna, where he dove headfirst into the world of mechanics. It was there, surrounded by blueprints, gearboxes, and the sharp scent of machine oil, that Ferruccio began crafting the foundation of his destiny. At Fratelli Taddea, he wasn't just another farm boy. He was a rising star. He excelled in everything mechanical, from internal combustion engines to transmission systems. He wasn't learning because he had to, he was learning because he loved to. His instructors quickly noticed something rare. A student who didn't just understand machines, but seemed to speak their language. But just as Ferruccio's journey began to take shape, history intervened once again. By 1940, the world was at war. Again. World War II tore across Europe like a storm, and like many young Italian men, Ferruccio was drafted into the Royal Italian Air Force. It wasn't the future he had envisioned, but it would prove to be another forge, a place where his skills would be tested, sharpened, and ultimately transformed. He was stationed on the island of Rhodes, assigned to work as a mechanic for the Italian military. There, far from home, with limited resources and endless challenges, Ferruccio's brilliance truly began to emerge. He didn't just fix engines, he improved them. Under intense pressure, with enemy planes overhead and supply lines stretched thin, he became known for his improvisational genius. He rigged repairs out of scrap, kept vehicles running with parts no one thought could be salvaged, and earned the respect of both Italian officers and his fellow soldiers. The war was brutal, but it was in those years, amid oil stains, war-torn machinery, and the deafening sound of aircraft, that Ferruccio Lamborghini went from a dreamer to a master mechanic. He entered the war as a boy from the vineyards. He would leave it with a vision that would soon set the world on fire. War has a way of crushing men, of turning dreams into dust. But for Ferruccio Lamborghini, it did the opposite. It forged him like steel under pressure. On roads, his days were long and brutal. Supplies were scarce, tools were outdated, and every repair was a race against time and desperation. Yet Ferruccio thrived in the chaos. He didn't just fix machines, he reimagined them. He invented shortcuts, fabricated parts out of scrap, and turned useless wreckage into roaring, functional engines. He became more than a mechanic. He became a master engineer, learning not from textbooks, but from the raw demands of survival. He watched closely how German engineers approached problems, how British equipment was built, how each nation prioritized speed, durability, or power. Unknowingly, Ferruccio was gathering a treasure trove of knowledge that no university could ever offer. He learned what worked and what failed under pressure. He began to understand how machines could be pushed past their limits and how to make them better. But even genius couldn't shield him from politics. When the British liberated Rhodes, they viewed anyone who had worked with the Germans with suspicion. Ferruccio, despite his unwilling participation, was arrested alongside collaborators. It seemed like the end. Locked in a foreign prison, his future looked as stalled as a tank without fuel. Yet fate had other plans. In the darkness of the prison, Ferruccio's hands never stopped moving. When guards complained of failing radios, he fixed them. When a truck broke down in the yard, he offered advice that got it running again. Slowly, his captors began to see what others had missed. This man wasn't just another prisoner, he was an asset. Soon, Ferruccio was allowed to work on British military vehicles. Word spread quickly among the Allied officers. There's a mechanic in the prison who's better than anyone you've got on the outside. What started as small repairs turned into full-time service. Prison walls blurred into workshop walls, and Ferruccio, he didn't waste a second. He watched, he learned, he improved. He built a reputation in the most unlikely of places. By the time he was released and returned to Italy, Ferruccio Lamborghini was no longer just a farm boy who liked engines. He was a veteran of mechanical warfare, a man who had mastered machines under fire, a craftsman sharpened by pressure and conflict. He didn't return home as a victim of war. He returned as a man with a mission, and that mission was just beginning. Back in the quiet countryside of post-war Italy, Ferruccio Lamborghini was a changed man. The horrors of war were behind him, but the scars remained, not just on his body, but in his spirit. Yet amidst the rubble of a broken nation, he found love. Clelia Monti, his high school sweetheart, had waited for him. Their reunion brought warmth to a world still cold from conflict. Their marriage was simple, beautiful, a rare joy in a time of national hardship. But Ferruccio couldn't sit still. Italy was starving, not just for food, but for recovery. Farms were paralyzed, fields lay unplowed, harvests ruined, not because there weren't willing hands, but because there were no machines to work the land. Tractors were expensive, fuel was scarcer than ever, and the average farmer couldn't afford to dream of recovery. Ferruccio, however, saw what others missed. In the junkyards and abandoned military depots littered across Italy, he saw not waste, but possibility. Old war machines, broken tanks, rusted trucks, they were treasure chests of potential. With the ingenuity forged during his time on roads, he began to strip, reforge, and reimagine. His breakthrough came when he designed a hybrid ignition system, a tractor engine that used costly petrol only to start before switching to cheaper diesel to run. It was brilliant, efficient, affordable, and exactly what Italy needed. Still, innovation wasn't enough. He needed money to bring his vision to life. Ferruccio, always the risk taker, turned to another passion: cars. He took a Fiat Topolino, one of the smallest cars in the country, and modified it to its limits. Then, without telling anyone, he entered the 1948 Mille Miglia, a dangerous 1,000-mile open road race across Italy. For a while, he flew across the roads like a man possessed. But destiny struck hard. He lost control and crashed violently through a restaurant. Miraculously, he survived, but the wreck left both physical and emotional scars. The near-death experience shook him. He vowed never to race again. Speed had nearly taken his life. From that point forward, Ferruccio decided he would master machines, not be mastered by them. Then came the darkest moment of his life. Clelia, the love of his life, died during childbirth. Their newborn son, Tonino, survived, but Ferruccio's heart was shattered. The vibrant man who once laughed loudly at his own jokes fell into deep silence. Grief consumed him. He isolated himself, throwing everything into his work, desperate to keep his mind from breaking. His father, seeing the weight of tragedy crushing his son, did something extraordinary. He mortgaged the family farm, the very land that sustained their lineage, to fund Ferruccio's vision. It was a gamble born not of business, but of love. And it worked. The DLA Super 35 hit the market in 1951. Affordable, durable, and brilliantly engineered, it revolutionized Italian agriculture. Farmers who once struggled to till the soil now had a machine that worked like magic. Orders flooded in, factory space expanded, workers were hired, Lamborghini Trattori grew rapidly, from a modest workshop into a full-fledged industrial empire. By 1963, Ferruccio Lamborghini was no longer just a mechanic or a tinkerer. He was one of Italy's wealthiest industrialists, a symbol of the new Italian dream, born from loss, forged in war, and driven by the refusal to quit. But as fate would have it, the fire inside Ferruccio was far from satisfied. He had built an empire from the dirt, but now he set his eyes on something even more elusive: revenge. Ferruccio Lamborghini had risen from the ashes of war and heartbreak to become a symbol of Italy's industrial renaissance. With wealth flowing in from his successful tractor business, he indulged in the finer things life could offer: fine wines, exquisite tailoring, and two particular obsessions: bullfighting and high-performance automobiles. Bullfighting captivated Ferruccio, not just the spectacle, but the power, the elegance, the raw, unfiltered confrontation between man and beast. It spoke to his spirit, unyielding, proud, determined. This passion would later influence the very identity of his future empire. But the other passion, cars, would soon ignite a rivalry that would shake the foundations of the automotive world. Ferruccio had an impressive collection: Alfa Romeos, Fiats, Lancias, Maseratis. But it was Ferrari that intrigued and frustrated him most. Over the years he had purchased not one, not two, but 7 Ferraris. They were works of art, fast, fiery, ferocious machines. But they had a fatal flaw that infuriated the engineer in him. Their clutches were notoriously unreliable. Breakdowns were frequent, and each time Ferruccio found himself stranded, angry, and underwhelmed. So he did what he always did. He opened up the car himself. To his amazement, he found something that made his blood boil. Ferrari was using the exact same clutch component Ferruccio used in his tractors. The same part that powered machinery through mud and grit was being used in million-lira sports cars. And yet in the Ferraris, it was failing. Ferruccio immediately replaced it with a superior version, one he had developed himself for heavy-duty use, and the problem vanished. For Ferruccio, this wasn't just about fixing a flaw. It was a revelation. He believed he could help. After all, he respected Ferrari. Enzo Ferrari was a legend in the automotive world, so Ferruccio reached out and requested a meeting, a chance to offer insight, maybe even collaboration. But what happened next would turn admiration into enmity. Ferruccio sat down with Enzo Ferrari in what should have been a meeting of great minds, but instead of respect, he received disdain. Enzo, proud and unyielding, scoffed at the suggestion that a man who made farm equipment could dare critique a Ferrari. With a smirk, Enzo delivered the insult that would echo through history. "You stick to tractors, I'll stick to cars." Those words hit Ferruccio like a slap across the face. The room went cold. What Enzo didn't realize was that Ferruccio wasn't the kind of man to walk away wounded. He didn't sulk. He built. Driving home from Modena, Ferruccio sat in silence. But in his mind, the gears were turning. That moment of disrespect, of being told he wasn't good enough, became the catalyst for something extraordinary. He didn't just want to build a car. He wanted to build the car. A machine that would rival, challenge, and surpass Ferrari in every way. He envisioned a vehicle that was not just fast, but refined. Not just beautiful, but durable. A car that combined the engineering precision of a mechanic with the heart and soul of an artist. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the decision was made. Ferruccio Lamborghini would build his own supercar, one that would not only silence his critics, but redefine the automotive world forever. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a man on a mission, not just to prove Enzo Ferrari wrong, but to rewrite the rules of what a performance car could be. And to do that, he needed more than ambition. He needed brilliance. So he assembled a team of legends, handpicking Italy's finest minds from the very industry that had once dismissed him. First, he brought in Giotto Bizzarini, a former Ferrari engineer and the genius behind the legendary 250 GTO, one of the most coveted race cars in history. Bizzarini was a master of speed and performance, and Ferruccio tasked him with one objective: build an engine that could humble Maranello. Next came Giampaolo Dallara, a rising star from Maserati with a background in aeronautical engineering. Dallara was young, fearless, and precise, a perfect fit for the radical thinking Ferruccio demanded. He was responsible for crafting a chassis that balanced grace with brute force, and to wrap this masterpiece in beauty, Ferruccio turned to Franco Scaglione, a visionary designer known for breaking molds and sculpting icons. Scaglione's work was art in motion, elegant lines, aggressive curves, and unmistakable presence. Together they dared to imagine something different. Not just a race car, not just a luxury cruiser, but both. A machine that would roar down a highway with the power of a track beast, yet glide with the grace of a royal carriage. It was unheard of at the time. Ferrari built raw machines meant for the track. Aston Martin leaned into refinement. Lamborghini wanted both. And from that desire, the Lamborghini 350 GT was born. With a 3.5-litre V12 engine designed by Bizzarini himself, the 350 GT wasn't just fast, it was sophisticated. It had leather interiors, smooth handling, and the kind of detail you'd expect from a Swiss watchmaker. Critics were skeptical. too comfortable for racing, too aggressive for luxury. But the moment it hit the Geneva Auto Show floor in 1964, jaws dropped. The press called it the future of the Grand Tourer. Buyers lined up. Ferruccio had proven that you could have both power and elegance. But he wasn't done. Behind the scenes, Dallara and his young team were already working on something wild. Something that would make the 350 GT look tame. It was a side project, initially hidden from Ferruccio himself. When he found out, instead of shutting it down, he gave them his blessing. The result? The Miura. Released in 1966, the Miura changed everything. With a revolutionary mid-engine layout, stunning curves, and a top speed of over 170 miles per hour. It wasn't just a car, it was a revolution. It was the first car the world would call a supercar. Celebrities, rock stars, and royalty clamored to own one. Its beauty was matched only by its ferocity. By 1971, Lamborghini was no longer just a tractor maker who built cars. He was a king in the world of performance automobiles. His machines weren't just keeping up with Ferrari, they were leading the pack. Lamborghini wasn't just competing, he was winning. The 1970s marked the height of Ferruccio Lamborghini's empire. His cars weren't just admired, they were worshipped. The Miura, the Espada, the Jarama, each model a masterpiece. Wealth poured in, and with it came global fame. Lamborghini was no longer just a name. It was a symbol, a status, a challenge to the old guard of automotive royalty. Ferruccio was no longer the boy from Renazzo. He was an icon. But behind the gleam of polished hoods and roaring engines, cracks were forming. The Italian economy faltered under the weight of political unrest and an oil crisis that swept across the globe. Fuel prices skyrocketed and governments pushed for smaller, more economical cars. Lamborghini's gas-guzzling supercars, once the envy of the world, suddenly seemed out of place in a world tightening its belt. Inside the company, labor unrest grew louder. Strikes disrupted production lines. Costs soared, and Ferruccio, a perfectionist at heart, found himself in a storm of logistical headaches and economic realities. The pressure mounted, not just from outside forces, but within. He had built an empire with his own hands. He had turned his defiance into dominance. But now he could see the writing on the wall. In 1972, he sold 51% of Automobile Lamborghini to a Swiss investor. By 1974, he sold his remaining stake and walked away for good. It wasn't failure, it was a choice. A quiet exit from a loud world. He returned to his vineyard in Umbria, trading engines for earth. Ferruccio Lamborghini passed away on February 20th, 1993, at the age of 76. But what he left behind wasn't just a line of luxury vehicles, it was a legacy. A living, roaring testament to vision, defiance, and unshakable belief in one's own path. Today, the name Lamborghini echoes across the globe, not as a mere manufacturer of cars, but as a cultural icon. Worth over $12 billion, the company stands at the pinnacle of automotive engineering and design. Each model, the Huracan, the Aventador, the Revuelto, carries with it the DNA of its founder. He didn't just make fast cars, he made a statement. That greatness can come from anywhere. That limits exist only for those who accept them. And that even a humble farm boy from Renazzo can build machines that make the world stop and stare. More than a man, Ferruccio became a myth, a symbol of passion over pride, of grit over glamour, of a fire that started with a single insult and burned bright enough to light a new path in the automotive world. And perhaps that's what makes the story of Lamborghini so powerful. It's not just about engines or speed, it's about revenge, reinvention, and rising beyond expectations. It's about building something timeless, not just out of metal, but out of courage. All because one man dared to challenge a legend and became one himself. Sometimes greatness is born not from privilege or easy circumstances, but from pain, perseverance, and an unyielding refusal to accept the status quo. Sometimes the fiercest engines, the ones that change the world, are forged in the intense fire of rejection and doubt, fueled by a relentless passion to prove oneself. Ferruccio Lamborghini didn't just prove Ferrari wrong. He did something far greater. He gave the world a new vision of what was possible, a symbol of power, innovation, and bold ambition. His legacy is not just the roar of a mighty engine, but the echo of a man who dared to dream bigger, push harder, and break every rule that stood in his way.